Hello everybody, and thank you very much for joining me for another Tales from the Crypt review. Today I will be talking about Season 3, Episode 4, Abra Cadaver, directed by Stephen Hopkins and starring Beau Bridges as Dr. Martin Fairbanks and Tony Goldwyn as Dr. Carl Fairbanks. And this is an interesting and memorable episode overall. The first half of the episode kind of plays out like a normal Tales from the Crypt episode, fairly well done. And the second half of the episode kind of has a gimmick to it, I guess you could say, that for the most part works surprisingly well, even if there are a few parts that feel a little bit too over the top for my liking. But overall, this is a very well done and surprisingly disturbing episode in some respects. So we start with two brothers, Martin and Carl, and it turns out that Martin is helping Carl with his medical exams because Carl needs some help studying. But it turns out that Carl's playing a joke on Martin when suddenly one of the dead bodies comes to life. It turns out that this was all a prank to be played on Martin for his birthday, but Martin is so shocked by the whole experience he has an attack. So that scene was kind of like a flashback. We now go to the present day, and the two brothers are still working together, but it turns out Carl made it as a doctor and Martin is doing research. We'll find out more about that in a minute, but it turns out that Martin is not getting the results that Carl wanted, so Carl's going to cut his funding, and you can still tell there's some tension between these two from what happened years earlier. So Martin kind of shows Carl what he's working on, but it looks kind of strange, kind of out there, so Carl's pretty much had it. The only problem is at this point Carl collapses, and he starts to have an attack. He's having some issues with his heart, I guess, just like what happened to Martin years earlier. So Martin basically drugged him or poisoned him with something. More on that at the end of the episode, as it plays in well to the twist. So it turns out we find out the reason Martin is doing research and that he couldn't be a surgeon was because he couldn't use one of his hands properly in the right way to become a surgeon because of what happened to him. So this is like his revenge, so to speak. Or at least we think so at this point in the episode. So at this point, the episode takes kind of an odd turn, and we see everything from Carl's perspective. He can't move his body anymore, but his brain is still alive, so everything takes place with him basically narrating it. And from his perspective now, for the most part, this gimmick actually works pretty well as we get more inside the character, and it's actually pretty freaky in a few places as well, although I do think it gets a little bit too silly in a couple areas. So it turns out that Carl is officially a goner, but he still knows what's going on. So, at this point, Martin brings him to another guy named Mitch, who's like supposed to help out with the body. And this character's a little bit too odd and over the top for my liking, but he doesn't really ruin the episode. So Carl's really freaking out as he realizes they're going to mess with his body in who knows what way. They put him in a meat locker in a pretty disturbing scene. They put him on a hook, which is really disturbing there, and they basically leave him there for what seems to be overnight, although we'll find out later it really wasn't. So we go to the next scene, and Mitch comes back, and it's an odd scene. He kind of messes with Carl's body. I thought this was silly and not really necessary. They didn't drain his blood, and we hear him talking. This is really strange because Carl, is still aware of what's going on. Martin comes back, and he comes in with some students, and he's kind of showing them what you do with a body. He starts cutting into Carl, who says he's getting his feeling back, which is really disturbing. And all of a sudden, Carl wakes up still alive. It turns out this was just a prank by Martin, basically to get back at him, I guess. And it also shows what Carl's been working on with his research all this time. So it looks like everything's going to be okay. But now it turns out Carl has another attack, and he is really a goner. It turns out that the drug, I think it was the drug, had some kind of side effect, and it affected Carl, really killing him. And then we see Carl still narrating at the end of this episode as his body is being taken care of. So overall, I really liked Abra Cadaver. There's a few parts that are a little inconsistent, but overall the gimmick worked really well for me. And I really appreciate the fact that they tried to do something very different with this episode. Also, this is one of the longer season 3 episodes, but it never really seemed to drag at all, so good job there as well. So overall, I do recommend Abra Cadaver, and I give it a 4 out of 5. And I would say that this is a must-see episode for Tales from the Crypt fans, especially if you like an episode that tries to do something a little different. So 4 out of 5 for Abra Cadaver, and as always, thank you very much for watching.